You know, honestly, I kind of miss the bookshelf thing I had in my old apartment because it kind of just made like a natural display. Not really a great background or whatever for any videos anymore at the new place. But at least I'm comfortable in this chair, and that's what matters. A few years ago, I was introduced to the game Root. My friend Jack, the other half of 115 Gaming, introduced it to me as he had just bought it, and he was telling me how it was one of the coolest and most interesting games he had ever encountered. Obviously, this intrigued me, so I went and watched all of the YouTube review videos I could find on Root, and those intrigued me more. I really wanted to play this game. Unfortunately, Jack and I lived in different states, and I didn't want to just drop money on a game that I hadn't played yet, so I kind of just stuck it in the back of my mind and hoped that one day I would get to play it, as it looked really cool. An asymmetric war game? I liked those. I was knee-deep in the genre at the time, playing games like Twilight Imperium and Dune, and this looked exactly like that, but with a fun, cutesy little animal theme. Cut to several months later, and I get invited to a game night with some other friends to play Root. I was so excited. Jack has been talking to me about this game for months, and I haven't been able to play it yet. And suddenly I have this opportunity to go over and have a fun game night with some other friends playing Root. I'd be able to play it, I'd be able to fall in love with it, I'd become obsessed with it, and then Jack and I would have a new game that we could bond over and have a good time playing together. So I rushed in my car, and I drove to the game night, and I proceeded to play Root. And I hated every minute of it. There are many reasons why my first experience with Root was not good. The first of which, and probably the main reason, is that I was never actually taught the game at any point in the night. I showed up, and about 5 minutes before the game started, I was given one of the factions, the Erie Dynasties. I was told this is one of the easier factions to learn. I was then sat down, and we started playing. I was told I would pick it up as we went along. I was never given an overview of the basic rule set. I was kind of given a rushed explanation of what the Erie did, but I was given no context for how they worked within the core rules of the game, or how they interacted with any of the other factions, or what any of the other factions did. I was literally told, you put cards down, you match some colors, and you do stuff. Secondly, I was treated as if I was a veteran player by the other people at the table. So normally you would think that when you're teaching someone a new game, there's a little bit of a grace that's extended, there's a little bit of help, there's advice given. That was not extended my way. I did not receive any olives from any branches. Instead, everybody continued to fight me and interact with me or steal things from me, and I had no idea what I was doing, why they were beating up on me, and what I quickly came to realize was that the players at the table did not actually care that I learned Root. They just wanted somebody to fill a slot to have an optimal player count so that they could have more pieces for themselves to interact and fight with. Basically, they didn't care that I was going to learn the game, they just cared that they had a good time and that they were able to win. Thirdly, the game was long. It was very long. Way too long, if you ask me. I think our runtime ended up somewhere around 3 to 4 hours in the end. 3 to 4 hours in which, again, I had no idea what was going on. 3 to 4 hours in which I was given no help by almost all the players at the table. 3 to 4 hours in which I was getting ganged up on by all the veteran players. 3 to 4 hours of an absolutely miserable time. And I just want to make it clear that there's actually more to the story about how bad this night was, so trust me when I'm telling you, I'm actually underselling how truly awful this particular game night was. In fact, it remains to this day probably, if not the number one, at the very least, one of the worst gaming nights and one of the worst gaming experiences I've ever had in my life. But hey, I'm a pretty reasonable guy, okay? I didn't immediately write off Root after this first game. I knew there was a pretty good chance that it was probably just this bad experience with this particular playgroup that I didn't have a good time. And so I thought, you know, I didn't like that at all, but if another chance arose in which I could try Root again, maybe with different players, you know, I might try it, honestly. Indeed, such an opportunity did arise, but a few months later when I visited Jack where he lived to celebrate his engagement at the time. I asked him what he wanted to do with me for my limited time there while we were celebrating, and he told me that he really wanted to play Root with me. I went into this second game of Root more cautiously optimistic. I didn't have a great time with my first game, but hey, the reason I wanted to play this game is because Jack liked it and he was hyping it up to me. Surely, I thought, if I played this game with Jack, then I would walk away with a better understanding of the rules and hopefully a much better game than the last time. Unfortunately, that is not what happened. I was once again dealt the Erie Dynasties, which is okay with me. I really wanted to focus on trying to learn one faction before I learned anything else about the game, and I felt like after that first game I kind of had an idea of what they did maybe. I still didn't really have an idea about the basic rules of the game. And luckily, while I did walk away from this game with a slightly better understanding of the rules because Jack was there to help teach, gameplay-wise, I did not have a good time whatsoever. I won't go into all the nitty-gritty about why I had a bad game, I'll just explain the basics. Pretty much, the Erie had a bad interaction with another faction, the Corvid Conspiracy, around the second turn of the game that completely locked my home clearing into oblivion and sent me into turmoil in round 2. Not terrible, but again, it didn't get me off to a great start. Unfortunately, from then on, just based on the cards that I was drawing and the position of the board, I was never able to get over this initial setback in the game. And I was sent through the entire game into this spiral of turmoil after turmoil in a scenario that was completely out of my control, and I just sat there in disbelief that such a game could put someone in a spot like this. It was after this second game that I decided, once and for all, definitively, for all time, that I hated Root. Nay, not just hated Root, but I decided that Root was an objectively bad game. Thus began the era of my friendship with Jack, where we had daily arguments about Root. Jack loved the game, I hated the game, and so we went back and forth every day. Unfortunately, here was my problem. I hated Root, but I loved Jack, and I wanted to play games with him. And then, of course, in a cruel twist of fate, during this period of our friendship, during this period of daily debates, the Root digital app was born. For Jack, this was a dream come true. For me, it was $10 I was never going to get back. For the next several months, we played many games of Root on the digital app. I continued to play the Erie because they were the only faction that I understood. However, with each progressive game, I have to say, our arguments persisted. My chief complaints remained. I just couldn't get over the faction imbalance. Why is it that the Woodland Alliance is continuing to always beat the Erie Dynasties? They're clearly overpowered, the factions are imbalanced, this game is not designed well, there's so many issues, the combat is random, I just don't understand. Now, you may think that I'm crazy, or that I was crazy for bashing my head against the metaphorical brick wall that was Root. But again, I have to reiterate that my situation was I really wanted to play games with Jack, and honestly, I wanted to play any game. And so despite all the arguments, all the complaints, all the annoyances I had while playing Root, I still enjoyed my time on the digital app playing games with my friends. We're getting to about a year on now since that first terrible experience with Root. I've played the game probably 15 or 20 times at this point, and I still don't really know what I'm doing. I know how the Erie works, but that's about it. And it was around this time, about a year later, that I made a decision. A decision that I swore I would never make. I decided I wanted to try and learn a different faction. I picked the Woodland Alliance, the faction that I swore was overpowered, that was continually beating me as the Erie. I realized, these really aren't actually as overpowered as I thought. I'm not winning as easily as I was seeing other games with the Woodland Alliance win. So that was interesting. But secondly, I also noticed that as I was playing the Woodland Alliance, I was paying closer attention to the Erie player because I knew how the Erie faction worked. And because I knew how the Erie faction worked, I knew how to both counter the Erie and also to help the Erie as a different faction. What was once random, overpowered nonsense was suddenly a slightly more strategical and tactical puzzle. I was picking up on an interplay between these two factions that I had never realized before, because I was learning this faction, but I already knew how the other faction worked. and I realized that I could try and leverage my position between those two factions in order to make the current game I was playing a little better. Sure enough, after I learned the Woodland Alliance, I switched back over to the Erie Dynasties, and once again, the game was different than the one I had been playing before. See, earlier, I thought that the Woodland Alliance was overpowered and that they were way too easily destroying the Erie, but now I see that as someone who's played the Woodland Alliance, how you can keep them in check and make sure that they're not constantly revolting in your clearings. And once again, I was realizing that there is a puzzle and interplay between the faction that I was playing and the other faction at the table. And suddenly, I'm now looking at the other two factions that I haven't been paying attention to at all, and wondering if I can get the same experience with those. Before I knew it, I had learned all the 4 base factions in the game. The Vagabond, the Marquis de Cat, the Woodland Alliance, and the Erie Dynasties. What was once random gobbledygook before was now an interesting, in-depth strategical puzzle about a push and pull between 4 different factions fighting over for the Woodland. As I learned the factions, the complexity fell away. As I learned the factions, the imbalance that I had sensed fell away. As I learned the factions, the block I had of immersing myself in the theme and the story of this world fell away, and I was suddenly really getting into the idea. I was ravenously learning new factions and trying to play as many games of Root as I could. I started listening to the Woodland War Machine podcast. I started watching Cole Wehrle interviews to learn more about the game. In my time when I wasn't playing Root, I was thinking about Root. When I played other games, I was comparing them to Root. I sat for days during my college classes thinking about how I could get better with each faction. And suddenly, just like that, I had left my friendly local game store with my own copy of Root. Nowadays, Root is one of my all-time favorite games. And probably it's one of the games that I've actually played the most. Whenever my friends and I actually do get together, the first game that we always bust out is a game of Root. Whenever my friends and I aren't together, we always have an asynchronous game going on in the app, at least once a week. So what was the point of me telling you this story? Well, I think there's 2 main takeaways that I would like to iterate and that I would like to be the main focus of this video. What I want to make sure that people know is the point of this video is not to convince people who hate Root to keep playing Root until they love it because it's secretly good and everybody's going to have a good time with it. Because that's not what I'm saying. I'm just using Root and Cole Wehrle's game specifically as a main example for my points. What I do want to talk about, though, is games in general. And I firstly want to talk about people who are too quick to make final judgments on a game after only playing it once or twice. What my experience with Root taught me is that you need to take time with games and play them several times before you make quick final judgments on them. In this modern era of Kickstarter hobby gaming, what I've noticed is that people want accessibility prioritized over good game design. And you see this all the time, right? People constantly critique games for being inaccessible or for being too complex and not catering to everyone. What they want is to be able to pop open a new game and they want to be able to read the rules booklet in about 30 seconds. And if they can't quickly learn the rules and they can't quickly play the game within 5 minutes and the game is too complex and it doesn't cater to new players and it's a poorly designed and bad game. And they play it once or twice and then they slap their rating on Board Game Geek and they move on to the next game. If you just want to play a couple of games once or twice and then move on, that's totally okay. But what I really want to hammer home is this idea of quickly making a final judgment on a game after only playing it once or twice. You see, after my second game of Root, I didn't just hate the game, I thought it was a poorly designed game, and I left it at that. However, it wasn't until I actually committed to learning Root and spending multiple games and multiple earnest attempts to learn every facet of the factions and every facet of the game that the wonder of the design really revealed itself to me. I just think that too many people could have that kind of experience with a game where they truly fall in love with it and they really get deep into the roots of a game, but they only play it once or twice and they think that they've seen all the game has to offer and they slap a rating on it and they move on. And I think what Cole Wehrle always tries to do with his games is he wants to try and make games that you can get deep into, that you can really commit to for multiple game sessions and really fall in love with. And so many people are just letting that fall by the wayside so they can keep going on to the next Kickstarter game. And you know, I just find that a little sad because I think there's so many games that you could really fall head over heels for if you just took the time to get to know it. if you took the time to learn the intricacies of its design, and if you took the time to play the game on its terms. The more you play a game and the more you analyze a game, the more you try to understand what the game itself is trying to do. Too many reviews I see that rub me the wrong way are people critiquing a game because of their preconceived notions of what it should be. I had preconceived notions of what I thought Root should be. I thought it should be more like Twilight Imperium and more like Dune than what it ended up being. And that was a problem I brought to the game, not that the game brought to me. If you're playing a game, the reason you want to investigate and dig deeper into a game is because you want to try and meet the game on its own terms. You want to judge the game based on what it's trying to be and not base the game on what you wanted it to be. Secondly, though, besides taking time with games, I really want to emphasize that you should try and play games that you think that you don't like. And there's a couple reasons you could do this. One, you'll find that your tastes will actually expand more than you thought they would. But two, even if you still genuinely don't like the games that you thought you wouldn't like, it will help you appreciate good game design better, and it will help you appreciate the games that you do like even more. I used to be very picky about the games I would even attempt to learn. I really liked thematic, strategic war games, I guess. Again, games like Twilight Imperium and Dune, those are the games that I really, really liked. And I didn't really like experimenting. Euro games, deck building games, worker placement games, none of that was for me. I said I didn't like any of that. I don't want to play any of those games. But what Root taught me, even though it is kind of another, I guess, Dudes on a Map area control game, what Root taught me is that games that I thought I didn't like, I might actually like if I took the time to get to know them. And so ever since Root, I have been trying games that I never thought I would try previously. And the crazy thing I have found that some of these games, I actually kind of like them. To continue using Wehrle games as examples, when I first saw Shut Up and Sit Down's review of Oath, I absolutely laughed. I could not believe how needlessly complex that game was, and I thought there's no way I'd ever play it. And after Root, I just couldn't quite shake the nagging feeling, and I went back and I tried Oath, and it was one of the most magical games that I've ever played. With both Hacks Premiere and John Company, I still don't fully understand them, but instead of being angry at the challenge of learning a complex new game, I'm actually excited. And now I'm looking at totally new genres that I always said I would never try that I didn't like. Euro games, worker placement games, deck builder games. Suddenly I'm trying these new genres, or I'm just interested in trying these new genres because I think I might actually like it. I never once would have looked at a game like On Mars or Brass Birmingham with any kind of interest before, but now I'm actually really intrigued to learn those games, and I'm kind of excited to try them out, even though I would have never played those before. And so, in conclusion, once the object of my hate, and now one of the main sources of my inspiration. I have huge amounts of respect for Wehrle and his games that he makes, both at Leader Games and Whirligig Games. And what I love about the design ethos of Leader Games and Whirligig Games specifically is that they don't try to make games that are easily accessible from the get-go for everybody. They try to make games for their core audience who is smaller but willing to take the time to deep dive into a game and to really invest a good amounts of time into getting to know their games and to really appreciating them and learning them. And it's kind of that design ethos that I also take into our channel here at 115 Gaming. I don't really want to just be a reviewer channel that plays a million board games every week and, just makes a bunch of videos about them. I like making videos for the small little audience that we have that really likes to deep dive into the games that I'm playing at the time. And usually, right now, that's Six Siege the board game. With ARCs about to finish development and into production and shipping within a couple of months, I wanted to take the time to look back at where I started with Cole's games and tell you this story because I think it's entertaining and I think there are some lessons that I learned and that you can learn from it as well. I hope you learned something from this video. I hope this was entertaining for you and that you enjoyed this video. It's pretty different than what we usually do so far, but I really want to admonish you to maybe look around at some games that you previously hated and give them another go and try and study them some more because you never know. You could end up like me. Maybe there's a game out there that you absolutely hate, but it could have the potential to be one of your favorite games of all time.